I think we've created a system where it's created tension in L&D. We've got to create structured programmes. If it's visible, then it's valuable.
On this episode of In L&D, I'm joined by Charlie Kokorus-Todd, who is the L&D manager at Proper Snacks, to discuss how we can balance this tension that you just heard her describe. She shared some great advice on building for application, learning to love the problem, asking consultative questions, understanding both the current environment and building towards the future state, and lessons learned from her L&D role in manufacturing. If you're enjoying these conversations, please do subscribe so you never miss an episode, and maybe even tell a friend in L&D. So that's it from me. Let's get into this conversation with Charlie Kokorus-Todd. Charlie, thank you very much for coming on the In L&D podcast. Do you mind completing that sentence for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've created a system where it's created tension in L&D. We've got to create structured programmes. If it's visible, then it's valuable.
You recently posted about this on LinkedIn and you referred to it as a strange tension, this thing between wanting to do something that's really formal and trackable versus actually what's the best way to help people build capability. So tell us a bit more about that tension and where you think that's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, over a period of time, I think a lot of organisations need to provide that evidence, whether that's through kind of compliance, governance, audit readiness, that we've had to sort of create learning, and learning being those kind of traditional workshop-based environments. And I think as L&D professionals, we've kind of got to the point where we think, okay, if we create something that is visible, that we can attend, then that will solve our problem. And that is a kind of, my 15 years of L&D, that's always been quite inherent in terms of like what we do and how we have to do it. We have to build content, we have to create content. If you work in an organisation that's regulated, then absolutely you need to provide that evidence. And I think, as L&Ders over the years, historically, we've had to provide that evidence-based learning being our workshop environments.
Yeah, I think that is the challenge, isn't it? You need to provide, I think maybe it filters over, doesn't it? If there's situations where you need to provide evidence and that therefore covers you against people questioning maybe your value, then you think, well, actually, for the non-compliancy type stuff, if I also then apply the same mindset that if it's trackable or formal, like you said, then it can easily prove that I'm doing things that are contributing to the business. But like you said, is that really how we build capability? That's the challenge there, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, learning is so very different to what capability is. They're not the same thing. They're messy, they're contextual. And I think application is key, and sometimes we worry so much about what the design looks like and have I got a set of pretty slides and how big is my content library, and we're actually missing the point of what that looks like in application in the real world.
I remember this is one of the things I really noticed when I first joined L&D was sometimes there's the need to default to something that's trackable or looks good or has gone through all the process means that the moment has passed where someone really actually needed that thing to build capability. So the desire to take lots of time to formalize something means that there's this window where people who just need the thing in the moment miss it for a period of time until the thing is finished, and then there's no guarantee that the thing is going to help build the capability because it's not necessarily designed to build the capability. So I did notice that at the start. It was a message I kept hearing from other people in the space.
Yeah. I think we're these solutions architects as L&Ders, really. We want to create solutions, and we go straight to the solution sometimes, at the detriment of actually thinking about what is the problem and actually how do we fix that problem, what's missing, what does great look like, and how do we get there?
Yeah. I know we're going to dive into that a bit more in terms of the practicalities and your advice for other people on that front. But what I've already noticed a few episodes into this is that there's really these moments in people's career, whether they're single moments or just periods where these beliefs really get shaped. So I'd love to know what shaped your belief around this tension or the balance between formal and capabilities and what actually works there.
Yeah, I think in my recent kind of career where I am currently, manufacturing is so different. And lots of different industries are very different, but manufacturing is really reactive. And although it's a regulated environment where you have to provide evidence to auditors, but compliance doesn't need to be boring. And actually, teaching people topics and providing them with the learning, thinking about application, is it really knowledge that they need? Because learning, great, if it's knowledge, fantastic. Let's, build a learning event. 9 times out of 10, it's not about the knowledge of individuals, it's about how they apply it. And I think my recent kind of reflection on that is actually looking at the bigger picture, how that's applied in the real world, in their environment. It's kind of hit home for me, really, to look at, I've got to stop building content. We have to stop doing this, and we really need to focus on how we're going to improve performance over time. A learning event. I mean, who likes education, right? Who does? Some of us do. L&Ders do, and traditionally we've always gone to that education piece, and kind of forgetting what's down the line of how we're going to move that needle, how we're going to improve individual performance. And that's how it's really happened for me recently. It's very easy going back to my previous message about, how do we, be these solutions architects, which we are, without just sitting creating content.
Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? I notice this a lot of the time, the similarities between L&D and marketing, but I always have to train myself when I go into a new industry or a new role, or even a new role in the same industry, that what works there won't work here.
Absolutely.
You don't need to just churn out and get to output. So has that really made you rethink the whole process in terms of, from the very beginning, how am I approaching this? I kind of need to park maybe past experiences and go from scratch in this new industry.
Yeah, absolutely. When you work in different industries, yes, you can translate a lot of L&D practices, a lot of models and theories. I think ultimately different industries come with different learner personas, right? And very much in manufacturing, the learner personas that I see every day are so very different to what I would be used to, working in education. And I think that is really crucial, that we understand those learner personas. In manufacturing, they don't want to sit through a 2-hour session talking about, food safety. That's crucial, that's important, but how are they going to apply that in their day-to-day work, right? How are they going to move that needle? And we just forget about those learner personas, and it's so important to understand our audience rather than making these lovely, pretty content libraries and forgetting about performance.
Yeah. Is it a case that, so if we were thinking that someone in food safety, for example, if they needed a course, here's everything that they do day to day in their role, and then you kind of build all that back up to like one big course, but actually the opposite is the most effective of, like, if we just had a resource that supported every small thing that they would need to do day to day, then it wouldn't be a case of having to go through the 2 hours in a linear thing or hunt through it to find what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we start at the very start all the time. Okay, what is the solution? How can we create content around that solution? What we're kind of forgetting in the L&D world right now, I believe a lot of L&D professionals, and me included, we need to look at, future state. What does great look like? What do we need to be great? And what's kind of the barrier to being great, right? And sometimes we, that is a simple framework that I think would be great for new L&Ders coming into the industry now, but also current ones, those that have been in the industry for, 10, 15, 20 years. What are we missing, right? What is great? What's getting in the way of doing that and building that, solution around that? Not content. What are the expectations? What is the environment? Are we creating the environment for them to go and apply it when they do come to a workshop? And I think, again, that's so important. We look at these trackable metrics of bums on seat completions that I like to say, because it's really trackable, isn't it? You know, everyone's got an LMS, everyone knows, you know, how many bums on seats we had, what the completion rate is, but they're tracking the wrong metric around those things. What metrics are they tracking based around performance and moving the needle of performance? I think, you know, probably going off on a tangent here, Gary, but when we look at things like metrics, you know, and the metrics that we do track, data analytics have been high on, you know, L&D reports. And I think that's changing now because of AI, right? We're tracking, I'd hope that, you know, that's kind of off the scale at the moment and not so important, because maybe we're using AI to track the right data. And I think that will change over time, and I think, you know, the content builds will change over time, you know, as I say, the introduction of AI, but it's been around us for a long time. It's just sort of blown up recently because people are worried that it's going to take our job, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know going off on a tangent, but thinking about future state being greatness, what does that look like? And we really need to step back and work back from there, as opposed to going, I can build some lovely fluffy content.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that's good because that's a balance between ideal world and real world, isn't it? But in the
Yeah,
ideal world, this is what looks like. And in the real world, there's those blockers that you mentioned. And
yeah,
once you, I think, probably identify the blockers, I'd imagine it's easier then to not default to knowledge or trackable or courses, because you might say, well, actually, the only thing that is stopping this person in their day-to-day role reaching the great state or the ideal future state are a few small things that can be solved by something different completely. I guess that's like you said, working backwards from that is a really tangible way to just go, what are the barriers? How do we remove those? And I'm sure that does a lot of the heavy lifting towards the outcome you actually want to happen in that case.
absolutely. The process before kind of anything else comes around, whether you're creating learning, you know, yes, that's vital, and it's really important that, you know, we design great kind of activities and initiatives, but education isn't always the fix.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to come back to when you said education there, you reminded me, you spoke a little bit about learning versus education earlier in on the conversation. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about if you noticed telltale signs that something was becoming very education-y, you know, like you started off wanting to solve a problem and before you know it, you're in a course, or you create something really structured and long that felt like it was overcomplicating. I'm saying this with the self-awareness that I do this all the time as well. I
Yeah,
suddenly decide that I'll create this big deck or report or PDF, and then I go, a Loom video would have been fine. And
exactly.
that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it brings me back to the point about looking at the future state, but also thinking about behaviours and environment first. You know, forgetting about the education piece. Okay, is it going to change someone's behaviour if I let them know about a specific regulation? To some people, that will hit home, right? Absolutely, I get that. You know, when we look at different kind of learning personas, but I think we really have to think about the environment first. Okay, let's look at the environment. How can we design an initiative around that? Not learning, right? And it might come with, you know, aspects of initiatives that do involve, you know, short bite-sized learning, but does it really need a 3-hour workshop session with death by PowerPoint? You know, and I think, you know, it goes back to my point about performance is messy, right? It doesn't need to be so formal. Our initiatives don't need to be so structured, right? And I think, you know, goes back to my LinkedIn point about us building this tension around it has to be formal and structured. You know, when we think about you and I, when we're trying to learn something new, oh, Google it, or oh, go on YouTube, right? Problem solved, done. Right, it doesn't require me to kind of jump on a programme or jump on a learning or education piece when it's so far away from what I really need to do and so far away from the challenges that I'm sort of seeing every day in my day-to-day world, right? Are we just getting them on a training program to show them about all the challenges they're having, or are we showing them how to overcome those things? And to do that has to be in their world.
Yeah. I think problem and environment are two words you used quite a bit throughout that. And I think that's a great way to just keep yourself honest, isn't it? Like, what's the problem I'm actually trying to solve, and what are the conditions that I'm either trying to create or that to the point of our blockers that I'm trying to remove. So I think sometimes it's just about keeping yourself honest, isn't it? And building
Yeah,
mechanisms to challenge yourself to say, am I still doing the right thing to get us towards the performance or the behavior? Am I
yeah,
still doing the
absolutely.
right thing? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and that has to be, kind of consistent in the thought process. Yeah, it's really easy for us L&Ders to sort of design something lovely and fluffy, not really getting the concrete information about what their real world looks like. That consultative questioning piece is so important. I think we wear so many different hats in L&D when it comes to, building relationships, consultative questioning. We've really got to nail down that piece before we just make a lovely course that actually just suits us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's sometimes, isn't it? If you're, to our point about compliance earlier, if you're judged on output, did you create this training that then led to the completion rate, for example, then you might default to output as a way to show kind of your value or worth. And I wanted to ask you actually about making something applicable. Is there anything you've learned, whether they're examples or just some best practices on making sure something is really applicable, can actually be applied, can actually reinforce the behaviour over time if it's reused, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, going back to my point about being in that particular environment and really understanding the problem, you've almost, as cliche as it sounds, you have to fall in love with that problem, right? You have to really understand that problem. And I know that sounds like really cheesy, but really understanding their environment, their challenges, and it goes back to the great kind of leadership piece that Proper Snacks is working on at the moment to build that capability and build that performance. But it's about understanding their environment. How do we do that? We need to have those consultative questioning, but also the great piece that we're getting from that is 9 times out of 10 we forget the consultative piece around the individual stakeholders that are involved in a project, that will be involved in the programme or the course or the academy. And I think we should start with those first. I think in recent kind of examples of that, we've started with our leaders first. What are your problems? What's preventing you from being great? From being able to apply greatness, from being able to perform? What does great performance look like to you? And I think sometimes we can be so zoned in on being involved in the key stakeholders that we believe want us to write the fluffy programme.
Yeah.
Right. Because businesses want that because it's visible. And I get that. We can still do those things, but actually don't forget about the people that are going to be involved in it, right? And I think that would be my advice to anyone, and a great example of how we've built great leadership programs is the key people need to be involved in the consultative bit too.
Yeah. When you say key people, you're speaking to leaders, but I guess also, to example earlier, you're those people in the manufacturing role itself. And
yeah, absolutely. Who, historically we've called our learners. But, the individuals that will be attending these initiatives, whether that's coaching on the shop floor, whether that's involved in 360 feedback, in one-to-ones, in handling those kind of difficult conversations. What does that look like to them? It has to be with them. It has to start with them. And I think, key stakeholders after, of course, the board, the leadership team, what do they want to move the needle and to be focused on organisational kind of plans. But we forget about the people that are involved, and not nailing and being in love with that problem.
Yeah, I really agree, because it's so easy to make an assumption about the problem someone's facing until you actually go and look at it. Like, this is only tangentially related, but I went to the Skoda factory a few years ago and did a tour of that, and I saw what happens on the production line of a car, and it was completely different to my assumption in the sense that if one machine in the entire process stops, then every other machine has to stop, and
Absolutely.
then there's a counter on how far behind they are on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And like without seeing that up front, I would have never known that that's the context of if one machine in 100 stops, how much it delays the rest of the process and the output for the day, and you miss all of those small nuances. So I imagine that,
100%, and if we look at traditional leadership programs, let's book a leader onto handling difficult conversations or performance conversations or, trying to get them to adhere to a policy. Let's get them on that workshop. I'm struggling to understand how that would close a capability or performance gap. Going back to your point about manufacturing, it's so reactive, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be, but that's the nature of the industry. You have got those bars where you see them on the line, is my line in red or is it in green gold star? And they've got all these problems going on. A lovely fluffy course isn't going to solve those problems.
I imagine there's a real direct correlation between the amount of time you spend understanding a problem to the quality of the thing you
Yeah,
create to solve it. I know it sounds simple,
yeah,
but so often
it does.
it sounds simple, but it's the most effective thing.
Yeah, it does. And these programs need to evolve over time. I think L&D professionals, and organisations kind of miss the mark sometimes because they spend 12 months designing the programme and they've not solved the problem and something's changed now, right? So it goes back to my point about it doesn't always have to be formal.
Mm.
It's giving people the opportunity to apply, bite-size initiatives or coaching or in the moment learning in the flow of work. Doesn't have to be so formal.
Yeah. Have you done sort of testing around that? If you do the consultative part, you think that this is the key problem to solve or the blocker to remove. Do you kind of test stuff on a small scale and then try to roll it out? How does that process work?
Yeah, absolutely. And historically, I will own up. I've been that person that sits there for months and creates this program, delivers it, and oh god, it hasn't worked. It hasn't landed. It hasn't closed any performance gaps. We haven't seen any crucial metrics improve because we haven't understood their environment, understood how they can apply it in that real world. And I've seen great examples of how we're doing that now, how we're coaching in that moment, how we're allowing them to, okay, is it a kind of knowledge gap that they're missing? How can we get them on board with that knowledge gap? Is it coaching? Is it 360 feedback? And we've sort of been able to see that needle move with engagement of our frontline staff. We have historically focused on bums on seats. And I hold my hands up here. It's an easy metric, but we've really got to consider the bigger picture. And great examples of how we're doing that in our real world now is seeing them coach, hearing those conversations in the moment. Sometimes we forget that actually that is happening, right? That development, that capability and performance is changing. It doesn't need to be that formal workshop environment.
Yeah, I think there's a good, we talked about tension at the start, and actually your point around if we take 12 months to build something and then the problem actually changes and there's no guarantee the thing that took 12 months is going to solve it, versus your point around if it's something on a smaller scale and we can actually observe the interactions happening using that piece of content, we're also quicker to figuring out what doesn't work, and that's better. I know there's a fear of failure sometimes, isn't there? Especially I've seen it with workplace learning and sort of enablement materials, but sometimes it's better to know what doesn't work quickly so you can pivot and iterate. And then also you probably in those moments, you're seeing things that work but could be refined even better if, that framing for this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
actually starting to solve the problem, let's build on it instead.
Yeah, and I think, being in manufacturing has helped me adapt to that approach. You know, things move so quickly. We have to be on the ball. Us kind of sitting down, creating a great learning, you know, program actually won't fix how quickly we move in manufacturing.
I think that's a good lesson for everyone, to be honest with you, because I've seen it in companies. Like one example would be I've been in a company where there's an assumption that the customer success team are struggling because, I don't know, of capacity, for example, or how to deal with complaints or difficult conversations, when actually what would help them is clearer messaging. So marketing could help the customer success team solve that problem by just building clearer messaging so that customers who come in then have a better understanding of what the product actually is. So, and that was only something we solved by digging into the problem and falling in love with it and not assuming that it's just, oh, there's lots of complaints, it must be that we need to train people on how to deal with difficult conversations, for example. Actually, clearer expectations on what we do would help our customer success team. So I think that's a good lesson for anyone in any function of the business, not just the ones where they've got the dilemma of kind of office-based and manufacturing or frontline, as we often say. I'm trying to think if there's anything we really wanted to cover that we haven't covered.
I think maybe a piece on that kind of cutting through that noise. What hasn't helped, I guess, me or any other L&D professional, you know, in my 15 years of being in L&D, is there is so much noise. There is so much noise around, you know, learning design and facilitation and how programs should be structured, whether that is kind of face-to-face, self-directed, lots of kind of different models and theories. I don't necessarily think there's always one good approach. It goes back to my point about falling in love with the problem. All the problems are all very, very different. Not one solution is going to solve that problem. You know, iterations, of course, and pilot, you know, programs and initiatives. But removing that formalisation, I think, is key. You know, you hear lots of conflicting voices on LinkedIn about you should do this and don't do that, and you should do this and don't do that. I think, going back to my point, fall in love with your environment and the problem, and kind of absolutely take pieces of information on how it's going in different organisations and what's, you know, on the agenda for L&D in the L&D world. But take things with a pinch of salt sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it can be so conflicting to kind of cut through that noise.
Yeah. The noise is the perfect word, because
Yeah, it really is.
it makes you question yourself.
Yeah.
Everyone else
Yeah.
is doing this, I should be doing this. And
No.
then you feel like you're behind, and then you panic, and then
Yeah.
you go, oh, actually, this would never work for me, because my
Absolutely.
context of my business, to your point around solving the problem and knowing what the problem is,
Yeah.
yeah, the more you understand that, the more you can go, well, this is a great idea, but in my conditions of what I'm trying to actually solve, it wouldn't
Exactly.
work.
Yeah. There's no single right way,
Yeah.
ultimately. You know, what you see on LinkedIn, 9 times out of 10 will not support your environment.
Yeah. It is a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? It's that meme.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you meant actually, you know, you said about trying to resist the urge to make everything formal. I think just to maybe close the loop on the tension, you said that you're seeing more people engage, and, you know, rather than trying to measure bums on seats, you're actually seeing engagements, and you're seeing meaningful interactions between people, and you're seeing problems you want to solve. Has that kind of actually helped more with your internal brand, or people seeing the value, because you're not trying to just prove that X, Y, Z people completed this course, but you're saying this is behavior change, look at the culture change, look at people actually seeing the problem they want to solve be solved by the help that, or what we're putting in place to help them solve it.
Yeah, and I think manufacturing is perfect for that, because it has so many metrics that you can actually say, oh, actually, I did move the needle on that. That initiative did move the needle on performance. Right, we did make fantastic products. And that is great within manufacturing, because there's so many metrics that you can use to say, I had a direct link to increasing that. I think, removing the tension around formal programs and looking at what tools we provide individuals with. Do they have access to all the tools that they need to get quick answers, whether that is AI, ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, those examples. Do they have that tool at the click of a button? Great, they have that. Do they have YouTube to kind of quickly help them solve this issue? It's about having the right tools, I think, will support the reduction in these kind of formal learning processes, but also having individuals that really understand how to coach, that really understand individuals' performance issues and problems and their challenges. Are they in love with those problems and challenges? Yeah. And I think if we are as a business, then that will naturally come, right? I hear so much about, L&D creating this learning culture. What is that? Yeah. What is that? Is it a fluffy LMS, which is fantastic tool, used in the right way? But a learning culture for me is, seeing those initiatives happen naturally, organically, holistically, not in that formal environment with the lovely happy sheets.
It's nice to see the same mindset there, because earlier working back from the problem and then understanding the blockers to that, and it's similar with the culture. If you creating a learning culture would be about the repeated actions that happen all the time, working back from, okay, well, you'd like people to be, I don't know, self-sufficient, for example, in how they learn. The conditions for that to happen are small resources that enable people, or just going with their existing behavior. Like, people are going to go to YouTube or ChatGPT if they're trying to solve a problem in their day-to-day life. So it's nice. There's a real consistent message in what we've kind of gone. Last question is something I've been asking everyone so far, and it's just because it's a nice reminder to everyone that we haven't all got it figured out and there's still things we're trying to work on. So is there anything that you're still working on that you haven't quite cracked yet, either around this topic or other things in your day-to-day role?
Around this topic, I'd say, Gary, it can be so challenging with that noise of kind of what's out there, what's working. And I think what I'm trying to learn to do is focus on what's in our environment. It's really important that I stay abreast of, what's going on in L&D and great tools that are coming through, what's on kind of L&D agendas. But I think forget the noise, it's cut through that, and look at what your problems are, fall in love with them, fall in love with your environment. And I think sometimes we can forget that, move away from seeing someone's lovely post on LinkedIn to say that, oh, this program was successful, this is how I designed it. That's great, it's inspiring, but focus on your world.
Yeah, brilliant. I think we started with that and we've ended with that. Love the problem, solve the problem, think about the blockers to the problem, and then be realistic about what's actually controllable in your environment. So that's cool that we've come full circle. Charlie, thank you so much for a great conversation. I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile and the couple of the posts we reference in the description below so people can connect. And I always commit people to this, say, they can reach out to you if they have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or compliments, they can send them over on LinkedIn. So thank you very much.